one Sangha member shared, I think she has shared with this group before, that her husband died 2 years ago. And the grief, the sense of loss has been deep and ongoing. So she shared that he showed up in a dream and told her, "This is ridiculous. Let this go. Live your life." And somehow that coincided with her finding a place on the coast of Oregon that seemed really fitting to bury his ashes. So she made the trip out and met her sister there and made this pilgrimage to this cove on the Oregon coast that she said turned out to be perfect. And she scooped out the sand by this big rock. The tide was out, and put the ashes there and covered them, and looked up, and her sister came and just gave her a big hug. And in that moment, she said, "I let it all go. I let it go." And joy came rushing in. Someone else mentioned noticing different kinds of joy: quiet joy, bubbling over joy, communal joy. Someone talked about being at peace, a kind of peace that is beyond acceptance. And out of that, this space becoming more and more open. Someone spoke about the bombing of Iran that had happened the day before, and began to weep. You know, And so we took that in together. What can we do? Well, let's sit. And then someone online who was a member out in LA said, but let's also sit for the nannies who are being snatched out of parks where they're with, you know, the child they're taking care of, or children, and they're just disappearing. Nobody knows. So we held it all in heart, mind, and sat in silence for a few minutes. And then at the end, it was just named this great gratitude for this place of practice, for this community of practitioners. How finding in this space and in this Sangha a wellspring that nourishes so that we can go out into the world and find what's ours to do. Another set of impressions that's been staying with me come from the North American Sanbo Zan sesshin that Scott and I went to in a place just outside of Toronto, Canada, a week ago. We came home last Friday late. There were 23 people from the Mountain Cloud Sangha out of the 45 who were there. That was the maximum they could handle in that zendo. And when we arrived, it was so beautifully set, and these 45 places with name tags at each place. And I found my spot, and it happened to be right next to the Roshi. That's happened before, just sitting anywhere near him is such a strong experience. I mean, I think his sitting spreads out to fill the whole zendo, sort of like a lake. But if you're close, it is so powerful, it is so riveting, that I didn't have to do anything. And what I noticed was we would sit down, the bell ring, and within about 2 minutes, he disappeared. And I could tell what had happened. Just gone. And it was as though I disappeared too, of course. How is it that is so beautiful? And then early on, one day I was walking in with my tray to the dining hall, and I just, with a downward gaze, we're all in silence, and I happened to see, just in my line of sight, Roshi holding a glass and taking a sip, just a clear glass. I just saw this gesture, so transparent. And when I mentioned it to him in one of our doksan, he said, "There's nothing going on." And you can see it. Kind of in line with that, the last full day, there were so many things to share, but I was after dinner just resting and dozed, in this after dinner break before the evening sit, and I had a dream that I was in doksan, this face-to-face exchange with Ryoun Roshi, and just sitting there, and he disappears completely. First it was just particles, and then it was so clear, gone, that in the dream I reached out to touch him, to just see, is there anything there? And he was there. Gone, but there, but gone. In his first teisho, or Dharma Talk, the session always begins with a talk on mu. And he told about a visit that he made to India, to Bodh Gaya, this year. And having the chance to see the forest where Shakyamuni Buddha practiced these austerities for 6 years in the forest. And he said, I was so touched. And then in the talk, there was a moment where he was just sharing, he'd seen the rock where the Buddha sat, the tree where all of this is said to have happened, and he sat zazen in that spot, not, I don't think, on the rock, but near there. And so he's telling about this, and he started describing Shakyamuni Buddha's awakening, this discovery. And he said he was astonished. The word just leapt out, astonished. And then toward the end of the talk, the word freedom. And there it was, there it is, here it is, this freedom. In his last talk, he took up this famous case where Toksan, the old master in the scene, comes wandering out with his bowls, and he's chastised by the assistant cook. It's not time for the meal yet, master. And Toksan just turns and walks back, just like water. And in that case, there's another monk, Ganto, who wants, together with Toksan, to help this assistant cook wake up, to help him. And so the koan has these different points But at the end, Roshi said, the real point of this case is compassion. And we could feel his so wanting us to see, to taste this world, to know for ourselves who we really are. Not long before this sesshin, I heard the Roshi give a talk. It was a recording. And in that he mentioned the Zen school, this phrase, the Zen school. And he said, it shouldn't be called the Zen school. It should be the human school. What is it to be truly human? This brings to mind a passage from a book that I've mentioned before, a little book that I really appreciate. It's by Soko Morinaga, From Novice to Master, The Extent of My Stupidity. And this is toward the end. He's a young monk in a very demanding context. And he talks about one night at the end of this day where they've been up since the wee hours, and all of the sitting of the day has finally ended, but the novice monks are meant to keep sitting, go outside and keep sitting. And he writes, I could not have roused the desire for satori, for awakening, if I had wanted to. He's so tired. When suddenly the fog cleared and a world of lucidity opened itself. Clearly seeing, clearly hearing, it was yet a world in which there was no me. The one thing I am sure of is that in this instant, the functioning of the heart with which I was born came into play in its purest form. It is not just a matter of the sayings of old masters, but the living koan of human life that continues without limit. Awakening to your own original face, enlightenment, doesn't mean being able to explain yourself or the source of yourself. Enlightenment is the vivid, lively manifestation of the heart with which one is born. The heart that is no form, no mind, non-abiding, attached neither to form nor to thought, but in dynamic motion. Consequently, waking up is not an end point, but rather a starting point. And just a little bit on to the next page, he uses this phrase with this invitation to all of us to come into true self-confidence. True self-confidence. Part of that is that wherever you are on this path, to trust that we are soaking in the thing we seek. Already here, already complete, and always beginning. World brand new. One student said, new, new, new. So how is this possible? There's a teaching from Unman, this famous master Yunmin, where a monk says, say a word that covers the tips of 100 grasses. And Unman says, inseparable. That inseparable covers everything. So tonight, I'd like to look at a koan that points to this one entirety and conveys a sense of the marvel that is right here where we sit. So this is a case from the Shoyoroku, or Book of Equanimity, or Book of Serenity, it's sometimes called. Case 4, the world-honored one points to the ground. Just a quick note, this collection, Shoyoroku, was compiled by Master Wanshi in the mid-12th century. So Wanshi wrote a verse for each case, and then later Master Bansho adds an introduction and commentary. So we have all of that. Here's the case. The world-honored one points to the ground. When the world-honored one was walking with the assembly, he pointed with his hand to the ground and said, "Here would be a good place to build a temple." Indra took a blade of grass, inserted it in the ground, and said, "The temple is built." The world-honored one smiled. That's it. So the world-honored one, of course, is Shakyamuni Buddha. And in this case, he's out walking, surrounded by his followers. Indra is there as a guest of the Buddha, walking beside him. The Buddha stops and points to the ground. Here is a good place to build a temple. This word for temple is made up of 2 Chinese characters. The first one means pure and clear, and the second is something like a pure country. The word is also sometimes translated as sanctuary, or what Joshu, great master Joshu, called the innermost recesses of the house. This innermost isn't about inside, outside. That most intimate, most welcoming place, this absolute belonging, your true home. Shakyamuni Buddha points. Indra reaches down, picks up a blade of grass, and sticks it in the ground. The temple is built. The Buddha smiles. Well, that's it. All of it. The temple, the whole world. Inseparable. Again, how can it be? Astonishing. There's a famous story that gives a clue, pretty well known. Manjusri, this bodhisattva of great wisdom, asks the pilgrim Sudana to bring some medicine. They're on this pilgrimage all around. And so Sudana goes off searching. And in the story, he searches the whole earth. And he comes back and says, "I can't find anything that's not medicine." And Manjusri says, "Well, bring me one stalk." So Sudana bends down, plucks a blade of grass, and hands it to him. Not just medicine, the whole world. Unman again has this well-known teaching from a koan, the whole earth is medicine. The koan says, medicine and disease correspond to each other or cure each other, depending on how you translate. Medicine and disease, suffering and compassion, not just equal measure, one body inseparable. Back in April, just before I left for that month of teaching in Germany, Scott offered the short talk for our Wisdom Wednesday. And he gave it the title, Sitting in Hell. Relevant to the times and also to this timeless practice. Scott quoted a saying that the tradition associates with Sekito, a 8th century master that, together with Baso, the whole line just comes through him. And Sekito is thought to have said, "Even if I am thrown into the deepest hell, I will not cry out for help." What has Sekito realized that gives him that freedom? Freedom and compassion. This equanimity of total equality wherever you turn. A blade of grass, a mountaintop, a bit of dirt, dust. That's it. All of it. Say a word that covers the tips of 100 grasses. Also, not long before I left, I gave a Dharma talk on Layman Pang, this famous lay disciple. And there's a little koan or story associated with him where Layman Pang is sitting in his thatched cottage one day and he's studying the sutras. You know, this whole tradition, the teachings that we receive. And he says, difficult, difficult, difficult. It's like trying to store 10 bushels of sesame seed in the top of a tree. And then his wife, laywoman Pang, also a practitioner, says, easy, easy, easy. It's like touching your feet to the floor when you get out of bed. And then their daughter, Ling Zhao, famous female practitioner, says, neither difficult nor easy. It's like the teachings of the ancestors shining on the 100 grass tips. There's a comment by a teacher, Jisho Warner, that comes up for me when I hear this anecdote. She writes, Pang's cry is not about the subtlety of the sutras, you know, how hard these are. It's about the difficulty of living. Life in a body is endlessly complex, seething with thorns and tangles, erupting with love and tenderness. She goes on, laywoman Pang speaks to us from the grounded viewpoint of unity, where no one thing is divided from the rest of reality, where her body is not separate from the ground. And then Ling Zhao, where is she speaking from? Buddha called it the middle way, neither difficult nor easy. She's not denying anything, like the teachings of the ancestors shining on the 100 grass tips, and each tip, the whole of the teaching. Marcia Lieberman has a painting, a lovely watercolor of Ling Zhao, and she titled it, Ling Zhao Takes a Walk, and this verse is under it. As we walk the way, the heart-mind of the ancestors is in every blade of grass. and they all hold us up. We could say this to one another, like the aging Buddhas did. And not only one another, the ancestors, the 10,000 myriad things, every blade of grass holds us up, is another way of saying, you are that. If you follow these koans and this whole tradition, the lineage and the transmission from master to master, it might resonate that this exchange between the Buddha and Indra, with the pointing and the blade of grass and the smile, it just mirrors the last public teaching of the Buddha on what I've always thought was Vulture Peak, but Roshi, who was just there, called it Eagle Peak. So in that last teaching, Shakyamuni Buddha picks up a flower, and just the koan says he twirled it. And Mahakashyapa, his disciple, smiles. So here, Indra picks up a piece of grass, sticks it in the ground, and the Buddha smiles. Transmission without a word. This recognition, this sharing, this world. You could say one seeing and no me. Nothing outside it. Still, the question, how can that flower be the whole of the Dharma? A single stalk of grass, how is that the temple, the sanctuary, the pure country, all of it? There's a line in the Shodoka, or the Song of Enlightenment, that Yamada Ryoun Roshi's father, saw as what he called the most simple and direct expression of our essential nature, what this world really is. And that line, which has kind of come into popular parlance now, ancient text, one is all is one. So that blade of grass is not only a temple, candle on the altar, flowers, trees, ants, computer, sounds in the distance, bombs in Iran. What else could we say about it? That blade of grass. Well, it's you and you and you, intimately, each one of us. Raise a single piece of grass and it stands alone. And it's whole. So this Master Bancho writes in his introduction, raise a grain of dust just slightly, and the great earth is completely contained within it. A grain of dust, a stone on the path, a bite of food, this whole body. This place is good for building a temple. Actually, already built. Right there in Shakyamuni Buddha's pointing. There in his speaking. There when Indra bends down, and right here where we sit. I often quote this line from Dogen. I just like it. He said, wherever you stand, you cannot fail to cover the whole ground. So, just a quick bit of a Dharma Hall discourse from Dogen that relates to this. The teacher Dogen said, previously one blade of grass, afterward also one blade of grass. How much separation is there between the former and the latter? This is talking to his assembly, his monks. And after a pause, Dogen said, the separation is only one blade of grass. In other words, no separation. You can't fall out of it. The discourse continues, Manjusri received the grass and said, this one blade of grass can kill a person and can give them life. But how does this kill people? And how does it give life to people? The discourse said, Dogen pounded his staff once and said, this is exactly what kills people. Again, he pounded his staff. This is exactly what gives life to people. I don't have my stick, so kind of soft, but can you hear it? Finally, Dogen said, without being caught up by these two sides, there is one further principle. Does the Great Assembly want to know it? Dogen pounded his staff once more and descended from the seat. Wanshi's verse to end this case, the verse at the end, he writes, everywhere life is sufficient in its way, no matter if one is as clever as others. It's always so interesting to read these verses and see how they point to the case. Utterly sufficient in its way, this one blade of grass, this temple. So how can we possibly measure or compare when everywhere you turn? That's it. Tradition calls it your original face. This fact, Roshi likes to say, the fact of who you truly are. And then in this text, Bansho adds, slips in a comment about this temple. He says, repairs won't be easy. Endlessly whole and nothing to repair. As Wanshi puts it, on the tips of the 100 grasses, the spring without end. How is it showing itself? This unending sufficiency that we can actually rest in and find ourselves at home.